Now, this is the first pass of my lecture series. The idea here is to go through the material and see how it flows, and also how much time it takes to cover the material. Let's start in. I'm going to start with what I'm calling Unit 0, which is the first slide. It's the series introduction. About 10 years ago, I started closely looking at the nature of reality to make sense of the anomalies I've encountered throughout my life. During this time, I've read hundreds of books on the subject, ranging from physics to quantum theory and near-death experience to shamanic practice. I've also done a lot of practical field research into various paranormal doorway activities such as float tanks, meditation, sweat lodges, hypnosis, hypnotic past life regression, brainwave manipulation, and sleep experimentation, and lots of activities beyond that. Over the course of the next few lectures, the idea is to describe what I've learned during this process and why it might matter to you. Since this lecture series has got a limited time scale and the topics that I need to cover are substantial, it's really not going to cover the material completely, but it should give you a good sense of what the landscape looks like. But none of this is a substitute for doing your own work. I will give you enough information, part of it opinion, part of it fact, and also reference material so that you can really do your own work if that's what you want to do. I'd really like to think that you can walk away from this series with enough information to have an opinion on things and enough information so that you can talk to people about it. And if they have something interesting to say, at least you'll recognize what they're saying, where it fits into the big picture. What I think you'll exit this lecture series with is a good sense of the state of the art in paranormal research. You'll understand the approaches, the methods, the tools, the lingo, and also the state of the art in terms of what's been researched and what's been proven and what hasn't. For many, this could be sort of a life-altering piece of information for you. There's a lot of people out there that are in the midst of their own search and really don't know where to begin. I hope this gives you a good sense of the roadmap of what the environment looks like and how to approach it, and you may walk away from this lecture series a different person than when you started. So I'm going to give handouts that are going to cover this material. They're going to cover my presentations, the figures, graphs, data, etc. And also at the end will be a resources page or pages that'll cover links, authors, book titles, etc., so that you have enough information to go it on your own from here. Okay, so who am I? Well, I'm Jake McGill, born and raised in Dover, lived there my whole life, moved away for a period of time back in the early 2000s and went out to the West Coast and moved back 7 or 8 years ago, and been back here ever since. Currently living in Wellesley. I'm an electrical engineer, or retired electrical engineer, and essentially have always been a sort of a tinkerer, an experimenter of a scientific mind, a curious mind. I was taking things apart when I was 2 years old, and it's no surprise that I became an engineer. The reason I mention all that is sort of a left brain. I shouldn't say sort of. I'm definitely a left brain kind of personality, and have always been into proof. There ought to be proof. And I always felt like science could offer the proof, and I've always been very devoted to science. So I guess in the terminology of the day, that would be referred to as a materialist, or a scientific materialist, or a reductionist. Any of those terms would describe what I've been for my whole life. No religious affiliation. I have had churchgoers in my family, most notably my mother. I was exposed to religion as a child. I sung in the Dover Church choir as a kid, but none of it ever really made sense to me and felt believable to me. I raised my kids to go to church only from the standpoint that I wanted to make sure they had some grounding in religion and they understood what it was all about. And when they got older, I encouraged them to make their own choice, and they did. That's where I stand there. I'll share lots of details about my life and that may apply, but I'll do that at a later time. In terms of this lecture series, I don't really have any particular objectives. I'm certainly not going to get rich doing this. But first of all, I enjoy talking about this stuff. Second of all, I know what it was like to just be flailing around the internet with a million different sources of information, but not really knowing where to start and what was BS and what wasn't. So I'm hoping to just sort of share that information with you. Not trying to convince anybody of anything. As mostly just throwing information out there and have a chance to discuss it. How did I get involved in this? Well, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, I had some pretty major health problems. I had a brain aneurysm and a pretty significant case of rheumatoid arthritis, which had me in a wheelchair for a short time. And so in my treatment especially for the rheumatoid arthritis, which was a very painful process, I was on a lot of drugs, especially a lot of steroids. And one of the side effects of steroids is not being able to sleep. And so I spent several weeks, actually a couple months, with very disturbed sleep patterns. And actually I went through a period of 6 days where I didn't even go to bed. I tried to go to sleep. And so I need to decide what I was going to do during that time. And so TV being as boring as it is, I decided to read. And of course the place that I started was reading about sleep and dreaming. So that's how I got started on this whole process. And what I found when I started reading, I started off with reading physics books, astronomy books and things like that, and as I said, started reading about dreaming, and I really followed the bibliographies and followed my curiosity in these books as one topic led to another. About 350 books later, I learned quite a bit about the nature of humans and the nature of reality. I didn't really set out on a journey to do that, but that's what it turned out to be. And what I decided after I started discovering a few things here and there, I decided to make sure that I left my beliefs aside, left my beliefs at the door, so to speak, and just followed the data. And I decided to believe whatever the data said. And so that was my mantra all throughout this process, is follow the data. As I said, here we are 300 books later. Give you just a quick synopsis of some of the topics that I'd touched on. Beyond some of the physics work, quantum mechanics, learned about meditation, relaxation techniques, mediumship, channeling, channeled books, hypnotic regression, psychic readings, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, terminal lucidity, lucid dreaming, light therapy, isolation float tanks, audio-based brain synchronization, plant intelligence, consciousness studies, devotional and forgiveness prayer, some religious investigation and research, indigenous peoples' practices like shamanism, learned about plant hallucinogens, sweat lodges, vision quests, journeying, healing, shamanic shape-shifting. I'm laughing, not that shape-shifting is particularly laughable, but that this list is pretty long. Let me see, where did I leave off? I learned about natural and synthetic substances like LSD and DMT and other plant hallucinogens. I learned about some quasi-religious concepts like angels, demons, God, good versus evil, heaven versus hell. It's quite a list of topics. So that gives you kind of a sense of the places that I've been, the paths that I've walked down. And really what I tried to do is take a look at I really spent a lot of time looking at some of the strange things that happen in the world they go unexplained. Near-death experience, for example, and many, many, many others. And the idea was to not just look at some of these odd events and scratch my chin and go, wow, that's amazing. The idea was to try to look at enough things from enough perspectives so that I could understand how to maybe connect some of these dots and make sense of the big picture. It's easy, well, yeah, some people find it easy to simply ignore some of these events and just chalk it up to hysteria, chalk it up to people wanting attention, etc., etc. I never really believed that. I believe that a lot of these things must have some basis in reality, or the people wouldn't be taking the time to report them. I've got lots and lots of evidence to sort of substantiate that. But as I said, one of the key things that I tried to do is take a look at enough of these kinds of events and try to connect the dots to show how they might make sense. Anyways, so let's move on from that. How is this thing going to work? Well, sort of the do's and don'ts. I've got 11 sessions right now, and I'm probably going to combine some of them together, so I don't know exactly how many sessions it's going to be. Probably something around 9 or 10 one-hour sessions. Each session is going to have a theme, and what I'll try to do is start with the simple stuff and just build a foundation and work our way up from there. Questions are fine, but I may decide in certain situations to hold off on questions so we can cover certain topics, and we'll kind of handle that as we go. I'm going to tell quite a few stories here. Some of them are stories that I've learned of through my research. Others of them are stories that have happened to me personally or to people that I know and trust. And so I just want to say any of the stories that I tell, to the best of my ability to determine, are true. You need to decide whether you want to believe them, but I just want you to know I'm not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes or pull a fast one on anyone. The stories I'm going to be telling you are real. The subject matter is going to vary widely, as you can just see by the list of subjects that I've learned about. You don't need any formal math or mystical or metaphysical training for any of this, or science training. You'll learn everything you need to know based on the explanations I give, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. As I said, I'm an electrical engineer. I've got a good foundation in science, good solid foundation in at least the basics, quantum studies, probability and statistics, and at this point, metaphysics. So if you don't understand, ask questions, and we'll try to remedy that problem. Nobody gets judged here, so if you don't believe, that's fine. If you do believe, that's fine. I'd rather not deal with belligerence if I can avoid it. As long as we can all be respectful of each other, then I think that's all that can be asked. Okay, so that's essentially what we're going to be covering, and I'd like to jump right into Unit 1.